It was a crisp autumn evening, and the air smelled faintly of pine and jet fuel. Emily Carter adjusted her uniform in the mirror one last time before heading to Gate 17 at JFK Airport. This was it. Her final flight as an American Airlines stewardess before she walked down the aisle next week to marry Daniel, the love of her life. As she boarded the plane with her trademark smile, Emily couldn't help but feel a strange unease prickling at the edges of her excitement. The cabin lights flickered slightly, casting long shadows across the rows of empty seats. She shook it off. Planes often had their quirks. Passengers began boarding, shuffling through the narrow aisles. Among them was an elderly woman dressed in a faded floral dress that seemed decades out of style. Her eyes were sharp and unsettlingly dark, like two black marbles set into parchment skin. When their gazes met, Emily felt a chill run down her spine, a cold so deep it felt almost supernatural. "Hello, dear," the old woman croaked as she took her seat near the window by the emergency exit. "You look radiant tonight." Emily forced a polite smile. "Thank you, ma'am. Is there anything I can get for you?" The woman leaned closer, her breath carrying the scent of earth and something metallic. "Yes, my darling girl. You can listen carefully when I warn you about what lies ahead." Emily froze mid-smile, unsure how to respond. Before she could say anything, the woman continued. "Your last flight, they tell me? How fitting." Confused, but trying not to show it, Emily nodded politely and excused herself. As she moved away, she glanced back only to see the woman staring intently after her, lips curled into a knowing smirk. Midway through the flight, turbulence hit hard. Drinks spilled, passengers gasped, and overhead bins popped open. Emily clutched onto the seatbacks to steady herself, glancing toward the cockpit where Captain Harris's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some unexpected weather. Please remain seated." But then came a scream from row 23, the same row occupied by the old woman. Emily rushed over, heart pounding. What she saw stopped her dead in her tracks. The old woman sat perfectly still, her hands gripping the armrests so tightly her knuckles turned white. But behind her, reflected in the small oval window beside her, was no reflection at all. Just darkness, and two glowing red eyes staring directly at Emily. "Don't trust him," the old woman whispered hoarsely, barely audible over the chaos around them. "He isn't who he says he is." "Who?" Emily stammered, blood running cold. The woman didn't answer. Instead, she pointed toward first class. Emily followed her gaze and saw Daniel sitting there, calm as ever, sipping champagne. He hadn't told her he'd be on this flight. It wasn't supposed to happen. Yet there he was, smiling warmly as if nothing unusual was going on. Panic bubbled inside Emily. Why would Daniel lie? And why did his presence suddenly feel so wrong? Back in economy, the old woman grabbed Emily's wrist with surprising strength. "Listen to me, child. Your fiancé, he has made a deal. A very bad one." "A deal?" Emily asked, trembling now. "What are you talking about?" The woman's grip tightened painfully. "With them, the ones who dwell between worlds. He traded your soul for wealth, success, immortality. But deals like these always come due." "No," Emily whispered, shaking her head. "That's impossible." Before the woman could elaborate, the plane jolted violently again. Lights flickered wildly, and the hum of the engines grew distorted, almost guttural. Passengers screamed louder as the temperature plunged. Frost spread rapidly along the windows, forming intricate patterns that looked eerily like claw marks. Suddenly, the intercom crackled again. But instead of Captain Harris's voice, there was silence. Then laughter. Deep, guttural laughter that echoed unnaturally throughout the cabin. "Showtime," the old woman muttered under her breath, releasing Emily's wrist. She pulled a rosary from her pocket and began muttering prayers in Latin. At that moment, Daniel appeared in the aisle, walking toward Emily with unnatural grace. His handsome face twisted into something grotesque, a mockery of itself. His teeth gleamed too brightly, his eyes shimmered with an otherworldly glow. "Emily," he said softly, extending a hand. "Come with me, it's time." She backed away instinctively, bumping into another passenger. Everyone else seemed frozen in place, unable to move or speak, their faces masks of terror. "You sold me?" Emily choked out, tears streaming down her cheeks. Daniel smiled wider, revealing rows of jagged, razor-sharp teeth. "Not just you, my love. Everyone here. Their souls will pay for my eternity." The old woman stood up abruptly, clutching her rosary tighter. "Enough!" she shouted, her frail frame suddenly radiating power. "I have fought creatures like you for centuries, demon. You will not take her." A deafening roar filled the cabin as shadowy figures emerged from the walls themselves. Twisted, monstrous beings with elongated limbs and hollow eyes. They lunged toward the old woman, who raised her arms and began chanting louder. "Run, Emily," she commanded without looking back. "Find the artifact in my bag. Use it against him." Without thinking, Emily bolted toward the overhead compartment where the old woman had stored her things. Inside, she found a small wooden box adorned with strange symbols. Trembling, she opened it to reveal a dagger etched with ancient runes. By now, the entire plane was engulfed in chaos. Passengers screamed as the shadowy figures dragged them into the abyss. The old woman battled valiantly, holding the demons at bay, but even she couldn't hold out forever. Clutching the dagger, Emily faced Daniel, who grinned wickedly. "You think a little knife can stop me?" he taunted, advancing toward her. Summoning every ounce of courage, Emily plunged the dagger into his chest. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, a blinding light erupted from the wound, forcing Emily to shield her eyes. When she looked again, Daniel was gone, reduced to ash on the floor. The plane stabilized instantly. The frost melted, the lights returned to normal, and the terrified passengers unfroze, looking around in confusion. No one remembered the horrors they'd witnessed except Emily. The old woman collapsed into her seat, exhausted. "Well done, my dear," she rasped, smiling weakly. "You've saved yourself tonight, but beware. There are others like him. Always remember, true love never demands sacrifice." As the plane landed safely, Emily stepped off, clutching the dagger tightly. Though she'd survived, she knew her life would never be the same. Somewhere, somehow, the forces her fiancé had unleashed still lingered, and they wouldn't forget her defiance. Months later, while unpacking boxes in her new apartment, Emily discovers a photograph tucked inside one of Daniel's old books. In it, he stands beside the same old woman from the flight, but decades younger. On the back, written in faded ink, "To Aunt Margaret, my guardian angel." Her blood runs cold. The old woman wasn't protecting her. She was ensuring Daniel completed his end of the bargain. Now, Emily realizes, she owes her soul to someone else entirely.